I never thought I'd see someone break into my backyard in broad daylight, wearing designer sunglasses, carrying a margarita, and acting like she owned the place. But that's exactly what my neighbor Karen did. Over and over again, every morning I'd find my pool chairs, move my towels gone, and faint perfume in the air. At first I thought maybe raccoons learned how to drink mojitos, but then I checked the security cameras. There she was floating on my inflatable flamingo sipping lemonade and sunbathing like it was her private resort. She even brought friends. So I decided if Karen wanted to play games, I'd make sure she felt the spark of her own entitlement, quite literally. Let's just say the next time she dipped her toes into my pool, things got electrifying. Before we dive into this story, comment where you're watching from and what time it is there, and don't forget to subscribe for more insane HOA revenge stories like this one. Life in the suburbs was supposed to be peaceful. That's what I told myself when I retired early and bought this house. It had everything I wanted: a quiet street, a small garden, and a pool that sparkled like blue glass under the Colorado Sunday. I spent years building my dream home, customizing every inch. The pool was my favorite part, my personal slice of calm. I even installed new stone tiles, a motion gate, and LED underwater lights that made it glow like a resort at night. But if you've ever lived under an HOA, you know peace is always conditional. There's always one person who believes they were born to enforce every rule, fine every neighbor, and ruin every weekend barbecue. In my neighborhood, that person was Karen Doyle. Karen was the self-proclaimed compliance queen of our HOA. She was in her late 40s, always dressed like she was on her way to a board meeting that nobody invited her to. Bright pink blazer tablet in hand and sunglasses big enough to cover half her face. She would walk around every morning with a clipboard jotting down notes about people's lawns, fences, and paint shades. You'd think she was training for the FBI. The first time I met her, she was already complaining, not saying hello, not asking my name, just pointing at my trash bins. Sir, HOA rules state that bins must be stored behind the fence at all times. I'll let this slide today, but don't make it a habit. I remember staring at her, trying to process how a complete stranger could sound so proud about monitoring garbage. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't move here to make enemies. I kept to myself, maintained my yard, paid the dues, and avoided HOA drama. But with Karen around, that was impossible. Over the next few months, she inspected my property so many times I joked that she should start paying rent. She'd pop up uninvited during my Sunday grilling, pretending to check the fence line. One afternoon, she even walked halfway up my driveway, just to tell me my mailbox color didn't match HOA standards, even though I'd repainted it exactly as the HOA handbook described. That's the thing about people like her, they crave control. And when they find someone who doesn't care to argue, they take that as permission to push harder. Then came the pool incidents. It started subtly. I'd wake up in the mornings to find my pool skimmer slightly moved or a towel missing from the rack. I thought maybe the wind had blown something off. Then one day I noticed something stranger: footprints. Wet ones. A line of small, neat steps leading from the gate to the shallow end of the pool. Now mind you, I live alone. No kids. No frequent guests. I locked my gate every night. Yet there they were, perfect prints drying on the stone tiles. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a stray animal, maybe maintenance forgot to close the gate. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. The towels were folded, not torn. The floats were inflated and left out. Someone was clearly using my pool and cleaning up just enough to make me doubt myself. After the third time it happened, I knew I wasn't imagining things. I installed a new padlock on the gate, changed the security lights, and even bought a private property, no trespassing sign, just to make it crystal clear. 2 days later, the lock was open. Now I'm a pretty patient man. I've worked with all kinds of people in my life: engineers, bureaucrats, and even a few who thought they were above the law. But nothing quite prepares you for someone who believes HOA rules give them divine access to your property. That night, I decided to check the security camera footage. At first, nothing seemed off, just trees swaying and the reflection of my porch lights. Then around 2:17 p.m., I saw movement. A woman in a large sun hat, a pink swimsuit cover-up, and wedge sandals walking straight through my gate like she owned the place. She carried a tote bag and, I kid you not, a pool float shaped like a flamingo. I leaned closer to the screen, paused the footage, zoomed in, and there she was. Karen. She set her drink on my poolside table, took off her hat, and slipped into the water like she'd been there 100 times before. She didn't even look around. No guilt, no hesitation, just pure entitlement. The video went on for 30 minutes. She swam, floated, took selfies, even adjusted her lounge chair for a better angle. Then she wrapped herself in one of my towels and walked out, locking the gate behind her like a considerate thief. The next morning I confronted her. She was pruning her roses, or at least pretending to, when I walked over. "Karen," I said evenly, "I know you've been using my pool." She froze, then slowly turned to me with a shocked expression so rehearsed it could have won an Oscar. "Excuse me, what are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," I said. "I have security footage. You and your pink flamingo float." Her face turned red, not embarrassed, but offended. "That's harassment. You can't film me without consent." "The HOA allows community pool access," if I cut her off. "Karen, this is my pool. It's not an HOA amenity." She smirked like she was enjoying the argument. "Then maybe you should learn to share." "I'll bring it up at the next board meeting." I realized then there was no reasoning with her. She didn't just believe she was above the rules, she was the rules in her mind. She didn't apologize, didn't deny it. She just twisted it into her own narrative where I was the villain for having proof. I walked away before saying something I'd regret. But that night, as I sat on my porch looking at my still pool glowing under the lights, I knew one thing: this woman needed a reality check. She thought she could walk into my property, use my pool, and call it community privilege. All right. Then I'd give her a community experience she'd never forget. And no, I wasn't planning to hurt anyone. Just to teach her in the most poetic, harmless, and electrifying way possible. Because sometimes when words don't work, electricity speaks louder. After that confrontation, I thought maybe the embarrassment would keep Karen away. For about a week, everything seemed normal again. No missing towels, no footprints, no mysterious wet chairs. I started to believe she'd finally gotten the message. But people like Karen don't learn. They double down. It was a Saturday morning when I first noticed it again. I walked out back with my coffee and saw my pool float drifting gently across the water. That wouldn't have been strange, except I hadn't inflated it since the confrontation. And there it was, fully pumped up, bobbing in the sun like an invitation. I stood there for a moment staring. My gate was locked. The sign was still there. But someone had clearly been inside again. And not just inside, comfortable enough to use my things like it was their weekly ritual. I checked my camera feed from the night before, nothing. So I pulled up footage from earlier that morning. The timestamps read 11:47 a.m. There she was, Karen Doyle, the self-proclaimed HOA enforcement officer, walking straight through the side gate again. This time, she wasn't alone. She brought two of her friends, both wearing floppy hats and holding pool bags like they were headed to the country club. I watched in disbelief as Karen pointed at my patio furniture, laughing about how cute it was. Then she walked right up to the pool, set down her drink, and jumped in. Her friends followed, splashing, laughing, completely at ease. They even turned on my Bluetooth speaker and started playing music. The audacity was cinematic. At one point, Karen raised her glass and said, "Cheers to the HOA for maintaining such a nice pool." They all laughed. That was the moment my frustration turned into fascination. It was like watching a live nature documentary, observing the wild Karen in her natural habitat, swimming in someone else's water and pretending it was hers. I let the footage play, hands shaking between anger and disbelief. Later that afternoon, I saw Karen outside, again watering her plants like nothing happened. So I decided to test her one last time. I walked over calmly. "Hey Karen," I said, "do you know if anyone's been using my pool again?" She blinked innocently. "No idea." "Why?" "Well, I said my camera caught something interesting. Thought you might want to see." She froze for just half a second, just enough to confirm everything, then put on that smirk again. "You really should take down those cameras," she said sharply. "They violate HOA privacy policy." "Karen," I replied, "the cameras are inside my fence line. They record my property. You're only on them because you're trespassing." Her tone changed instantly, cold, defensive, almost threatening. "Careful," she said. "The HOA can fine you for harassment. You're creating a hostile environment." I couldn't believe it. She got caught trespassing on camera, and somehow she managed to turn herself into the victim. I didn't even know whether to laugh or yell. But she wasn't done. The next day, I got an HOA notice in my mailbox. It was a warning for unauthorized surveillance equipment. The letter was signed by, you guessed it, Karen Doyle, HOA committee officer. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the pool. It was about control. She didn't want to swim, she wanted to prove she could get away with it, that she could do whatever she wanted, and I couldn't stop her. So I decided I'd stop trying to reason. It was time to be creative. That night, I sat on my porch with my laptop, replaying the footage again and again, watching Karen float around posing for selfies with my flamingo float splashing water like a spoiled teenager. I thought about installing better locks, motion alarms, maybe even reporting her. But honestly, I was done playing defense. Then I remembered something. Years ago, before I retired, I used to work as an electrical technician for a private contractor. I knew everything about circuits, safety systems, and outdoor wiring. In other words, I knew how to deliver a controlled surprise, perfectly safe but unforgettable. An idea started to form. At first, it was just a fantasy, a funny thought, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Karen believed she could walk into my property anytime she pleased. Fine, let her. I'd just make sure the next time she did, she'd think twice before taking another dip. I started by sketching out a small circuit design, a harmless low-voltage current that could be triggered remotely. The setup would send a quick, harmless shock through the water, not dangerous, just enough to jolt someone like static electricity. Safe, legal, and very, very effective. But I wasn't about to test it on a whim. I ordered parts online, waterproof connectors, a low-amp transformer, and an insulated switch system. It took a few days for everything to arrive. During that time, I made sure to keep my camera rolling 24/7. Sure enough, Karen didn't disappoint. On Wednesday afternoon, I caught her again. Same routine gate tote bag float. But this time, something new. She brought her teenage son. That made me pause. The last thing I wanted was to involve a kid in my plan. Fortunately, the boy seemed disinterested, sitting on a chair with his phone, while Karen swam laps like she was training for the HOA Olympics. They stayed an hour left quietly, and the next day I saw her wave at me from her driveway, like nothing ever happened. "Lovely weather for swimming," she called out with a grin. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to make sure the whole neighborhood saw exactly who she was. The next weekend, I spent the entire morning setting up. I ran the wiring along the edge of the pool, neatly hidden under decorative tiles. The current source was a harmless static system, the kind used for pet training collars, calibrated to less than 15 volts. I even tested it on myself. It was just enough to make your muscles twitch for a second. No pain, no harm, but definitely memorable. I placed the trigger switch inside my house, connected to my monitor. One click, and the system would activate for exactly 1 second. The setup was ready. All I needed now was the star of the show. So I made it inviting. I unlocked the gate, left the towels neatly folded, and set the flamingo float right in the middle of the pool like bait. Then I positioned the cameras perfectly, one on the patio, one above the pool light, and one hidden in the flower bed for a wide shot. Everything was quiet. The sun was bright, the water was crystal clear, and the air had that heavy summer stillness before chaos. I didn't have to wait long. Around 1:00 p.m., I heard voices over the fence, Karen's distinct laugh, followed by another woman saying, "Are you sure it's okay?" Karen replied confidently, "He's gone for the weekend." I checked. "Besides, I'm on the HOA board, it's fine." I smiled. Oh, it was definitely fine. Through the live feed, I watched her walk through the gate, sunglasses on, sipping something from a cup. Her friend followed, laughing nervously. Karen slipped off her sandals, walked to the edge of the pool, and said the line that still makes me grin to this day, "See, no one's gonna stop me." Little did she know I already had my finger on the switch. I'll admit, as I sat there in front of the monitor with my finger hovering over that button, I hesitated for a second. Not because I felt guilty, no, that ship had long sailed the moment Karen tried to find me for installing cameras on my own property, but because I wanted it to be perfect. If I was going to give her the shock of her life, it had to be cinematic. Precise. The kind of karma you could replay in slow motion and never get tired of watching. But before I tell you what happened when I pressed that switch, let me rewind a bit to the days leading up to that Saturday when I planned it all. After catching Karen trespassing for the third time, I realized simple confrontation wouldn't work. She thrived on arguments. If you yelled at her, she won. If you ignored her, she doubled down. What I needed wasn't a fight, it was a trap. Something poetic. Something that didn't just stop her, but exposed her arrogance for the whole neighborhood to see. That's when I started thinking about my old workbench in the garage. Years ago, I designed low-voltage training systems for animal containment fences, harmless electric deterrents that kept pets from crossing certain boundaries. Perfectly legal, safe, tested, and if set up right, they could be adapted to work in creative ways. So one night, I pulled out my dusty toolbox, rolled up my sleeves, and started sketching diagrams on an old pizza box. The concept was simple. When the switch was pressed, it would send a 1-second pulse through a conductive mesh placed under the pool steps. It wouldn't electrocute, it would startle. Enough to make someone gasp, scream, and maybe even reconsider life choices. But the beauty of it wasn't just in the zap. It was in the timing. The cameras had to capture everything, her face, her reaction, the splash, and the chaos that followed. I wasn't doing this just for me anymore. I was doing it for every homeowner who's ever been bullied, fined, or shamed by an HOA dictator with too much free time. The next day, I drove to the local hardware store. The clerk recognized me. I'd been there enough times, fixing things after Karen's inspection notes. "Back again, Mike?" he asked, scanning the voltage regulator I set on the counter. "Yeah," I said, keeping a straight face. "Just working on some backyard pest control." He nodded sympathetically. "Coyote's worse," I said. "A talking one with a clipboard." That got a good laugh out of him. Back home, I got to work. I spent hours carefully embedding the conductive wire under the shallow-end tiles. It was invisible, completely hidden beneath the water's shimmer. Then I installed a remote switch on my desk, inside the house, connected through a Wi-Fi relay. When I pressed that button, it would trigger a small power surge, just enough to send a jolt through the steps like a live handshake from karma itself. But I wasn't reckless. I tested everything twice. I filled the pool, activated the switch, and dipped my own hand in. It tingled like static from an old TV screen. Harmless, but absolutely noticeable. Then I tested it with my multimeter 12 volts DC. Safe as a car battery, but shocking enough to make someone scream if they weren't expecting it. Perfect. That night, I reviewed the camera placements. One by the flower bed for a wide shot, another fixed near the pool light for close-up, and one by the patio umbrella, the reaction cam. I even adjusted the brightness and angle for maximum clarity. You could have mistaken it for a movie set. Now you might think I was going overboard. Maybe I was. But after months of being harassed, fined, and spied on by this woman after watching her break into my property like it was a community spa, this wasn't just revenge, it was art. Still, a small part of me hesitated. What if she had guests? What if someone innocent got caught up in it? So I built a failsafe. The system was wired to only activate when motion sensors detected one person in the pool area, not multiple. That way, if she brought anyone else, I could hold back. See, revenge is best served precise, not reckless. Over the next 2 days, I prepared every detail. I even baited the setup. On Friday evening, I left the side gate slightly ajar, not wide open, but just enough to look accidentally unlatched. I placed one of my spare towels on the chair and set out a bottle of sunscreen like I'd been interrupted mid-swim. And of course I floated that ridiculous pink flamingo right back into the center of the pool. If there was one thing I'd learned, it was that people like Karen couldn't resist temptation when it looked forbidden. She was addicted to breaking boundaries figuratively and literally. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, my cameras detected motion. I opened the feed on my monitor and saw her face appear on screen. She peeked through the gate like a thief, except thieves are subtle. Karen wasn't. She strutted in like she was returning to her property, holding a glass of wine at noon and wearing a sun hat so wide it looked like a satellite dish. I hit record. "Good morning, Your Majesty," I muttered under my breath. She walked right up to the pool, kicked off her sandals, and as if mocking me, did a slow, dramatic stretch. Then she climbed onto the flamingo float, drink in hand, and sighed, "Ah, this is life." I could barely contain my laughter. It was like watching a parody of entitlement. After a few minutes, she started adjusting the chair, humming loudly, and I kid you not, took out her phone to film herself. "Day off at my private pool," she said into the camera. Private. My pool. I could feel the irony boiling in my veins. That was my cue. I opened the control panel on my laptop. The switch icon glowed green. All systems armed. Camera feeds synced. The moment of truth had arrived. I watched her dip one foot into the water, then another, still filming herself like some self-proclaimed influencer of the HOA. She twirled, tossed her hat aside, and leaned back into the float. "See, no one's gonna stop me," she said, laughing to her friend on the phone. That was it, the line, the finale, the perfect cue. My finger pressed the switch. There was a faint click from the relay box, followed by the smallest ripple on the pool's surface. For half a second, nothing happened. Then AAA HO. Her scream could have shattered glass. The flamingo shot forward, spinning like a carnival ride as she flailed, spilling her drink and splashing wildly. The camera caught every frame in glorious HD, her wig tilting sideways, her sunglasses flying off her legs, kicking like a startled duck. She scrambled out of the water so fast she nearly slipped. The float deflated under her knee with a pathetic hiss. She stood there dripping, shaking, looking around as if Poseidon himself had just personally smacked her for trespassing. What the hell was that, she shouted to, nobody pointing accusingly at the pool. "This water is electric, this is illegal." I muted my mic to laugh. It wasn't just the scream, it was the outrage, the disbelief. The way she looked betrayed by the very pool she stole. For a moment I almost felt bad. Almost. But then she shouted again, "I'm calling the police." Perfect. Because I already knew exactly what the footage would show: Karen Doyle trespassing, breaking into private property illegally, using someone's pool, and receiving a harmless shock of poetic justice. It was only a matter of time before this suburban soap opera went public. The scream was so loud I'm surprised the birds didn't file a noise complaint. I sat in my living room, eyes glued to the monitor, coffee halfway to my mouth, watching what could only be described as pure cinematic karma unfold. Karen stumbled backward, drenched from head to toe, her designer sunglasses sinking somewhere to the bottom of the pool. She looked around wildly, as if expecting lightning to strike her twice. Her face twisted between confusion, fury, and humiliation, the perfect trifecta of HOA justice. "Who did this?" she shrieked, clutching her towel like a battle flag. "This is a lawsuit, this is." And then she froze. Because one of her friends, a woman I hadn't even noticed at first, peeked through the gate, phone in hand, filming the entire thing. "Karen, are you okay?" the friend asked, trying not to laugh. "Do I look?" "Okay, Brenda, I've just been electrocuted." Now, for the record, she hadn't. The voltage was low enough to be safer than static from a doorknob, but try explaining that to a woman whose ego had just been zapped in front of a live audience. I kept watching, half horrified, half entertained. She stomped around the pool deck, muttering to herself, waving her arms like she was directing traffic. "He did this on purpose. He rigged it. This is an attack." Then she stormed out of the gate, still dripping, still furious, leaving behind her tote bag sandals and the poor half-deflated flamingo float. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "And that's a wrap." But of course Karen wasn't the type to just storm off and let things go. No. When people like her lose, they don't retreat, they reload. About 30 minutes later, I heard tires screeching in front of my house. I peeked through the blinds. A familiar beige SUV had pulled up, hazard lights flashing, and out stepped Karen, still in her swimsuit, wrapped in a towel hair plastered to her forehead. She was shouting into her phone like a general commanding an army. "I want them here, now. Yes, officers, he electrocuted me in cold blood. In his pool, I nearly choked on my coffee." She was calling the police, over a prank she brought upon herself. I quickly grabbed the hard drive containing the camera footage. This was about to get good. 10 minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled up. The officers looked bewildered. I met them at the driveway, calm as ever. "Afternoon, gentlemen," I said. "Can I help you?" The taller officer sighed, glancing at his partner before speaking. "Sir, we got a call about, an electric assault." I did my best not to smile. "Ah, yes. That would be my neighbor, Karen Doyle." "Would you like to see the footage?" Karen came stomping up behind them, waving her hands. "Don't listen to him. He set a trap. He put live wires in the water. I could have died." I gestured politely toward the porch. "Officers, if you'll follow me." Inside, I pulled up the recorded footage on my monitor, clear as day. Karen entering my yard without permission, unlocking my gate, setting down her drink, jumping in the pool, floating, laughing, and then zap. The moment her scream echoed from the speakers, the officers both turned to look at her. One of them even coughed to hide a laugh. "So the taller officer said slowly, you were using his pool without permission." Karen's jaw tightened. "That's not the point. The point is he used an electrical device to ma'am," the officer interrupted. "You were trespassing. This is private property." She blinked, speechless. It was the first time I'd ever seen her without a comeback ready. I leaned casually against the counter. For reference, officers, the device emits less voltage than a child's toy car battery. Totally safe. I even tested it myself. You can check the specs. The shorter officer smiled slightly. "We might need to confiscate the footage for evidence, but I think we've seen enough to know what happened." Karen was fuming, her face redder than the HOA's no parking zone signs. "So that's it, you're just gonna let him get away with this?" The tall officer tilted his head. "Ma'am, you broke into his backyard and used his pool. If anything, you're lucky he didn't press trespassing charges." I thought she might actually explode. Instead, she glared at me, eyes narrowing like she was plotting something darker. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The officers wrapped up the report, gave me a polite nod, and left. Karen, however, lingered just long enough to hurl one final threat over her shoulder. "This isn't over, Mike," I smiled. "I certainly hope not. This is getting fun." The next few days were peaceful. Suspiciously peaceful. The HOA newsletter didn't mention my name, Karen's car didn't appear on my street, and no new fines showed up in my mailbox. It was almost like the calm before a storm. Then, Thursday afternoon, I got an email from the HOA board. The subject line read, "You are Gent. Community safety concern." I opened it and nearly laughed out loud. It was a formal complaint filed by none other than Karen Doyle, accusing me of reckless endangerment, misuse of electrical systems, and public endangerment within HOA boundaries. She claimed my pool was a live death trap and that I had weaponized a community resource. Community resource. My private pool. The email ended with a line saying the HOA would investigate immediately. And just like that, the circus was back in town. The next morning, 3 HOA board members showed up at my door, clipboards in hand. At their head, Karen, of course, now fully dressed, acting like the victim of a major scandal. "Mr. Cooper," said the board president, "we've received reports of an unsafe electrical installation in your pool." I gestured politely toward the backyard. "By all means, inspect away." Karen gave me a smug look as they walked through the gate. "You might want to lawyer up," she whispered. I said nothing, I didn't have to. As they gathered around the pool, I turned on my camera system again, ready to record the moment her smugness shattered. I explained how the setup worked, the safety voltage, the automated timer, the certifications. I even showed them the documentation. The board president frowned. "Everything seems compliant." Karen's smile faltered. "That can't be right." He shocked me. The treasurer chuckled under his breath. "Sounds like karma did the shocking, not him." Even the board members couldn't hide their amusement. Finally, the president turned to her. "Karen, according to this footage, you were trespassing multiple times. That's a serious violation." Her eyes widened. "You're taking his side. We're taking the side of the law," the president said sternly. Karen stormed off, muttering under her breath, but I could tell from her expression she wasn't done. She wanted revenge, and I had a feeling the next chapter of this suburban soap opera was about to be even more entertaining. Still, as I stood there looking over my quiet pool that evening, I couldn't help but smile. The air was calm again. The water rippled peacefully under the orange glow of sunset. For the first time in months, it felt like I'd taken my backyard back. I poured myself a drink, sat down by the poolside, and whispered, "Here's to peace, quiet, and a little spark of justice." I wish I could say that after that day, Karen finally learned her lesson. That she retreated quietly into her beige HOA-approved home and started minding her own business. But no. If there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's that they can't stand losing, especially not in public, especially not when the entire neighborhood is laughing about it. The story of Karen's electric pool day, as the neighbors had started calling it, spread faster than fresh gossip at a board meeting. Someone, probably Brenda, the friend who filmed the whole thing, had leaked the footage. Within hours, snippets were circulating on the neighborhood Facebook group. The comments were brutal. "Wait, is that the Karen Doyle? Did she seriously break into his pool again? Laugh my ass off, she got shocked by her own entitlement." By morning, the clip had been shared dozens of times. Someone even made a meme, Karen's horrified face with lightning bolts behind her and the caption, "HOA, enforcement level 1, 0.00000 volts. Of course, she didn't find it funny. 3 days later, I was in my garage tinkering with some tools when I heard shouting outside. I stepped out to see Karen standing in my driveway again, this time flanked by 2 police officers and holding a binder thicker than a Bible. "There he is," she barked, pointing at me like she was identifying a fugitive. "That's the man who assaulted me with a deadly electrical device." The younger officer looked exhausted already. The older one gave me a sympathetic look, the kind you give someone who's been through this before. "Sir," he began, "we've received a formal complaint from Miss Doyle here. She's alleging that you've set up an unsafe electrical system in your swimming pool and possibly violated HOA safety ordinances." I nodded calmly. "Of course. Would you like to see the documentation again?" Karen scoffed. "He faked those. I have proof that his system is illegal under County Code section." I cut her off, handing a folder to the officer. "This is the certified safety report from the electrician I hired to inspect it. Voltage under 15 DC. No risk to life or property. Fully compliant with residential safety standards." And I flipped the page. Here's the trespassing footage. Same day, same incident. Karen's mouth snapped shut. The older officer raised an eyebrow, flipping through the paperwork. "Miss Doyle, were you aware that entering his property without permission is a criminal offense?" She crossed her arms. "It's a community area. The HOA handbook says—" "Ma'am," I interrupted with the politest smile I could muster, "this isn't the community pool. It's my private property paid in full. The HOA doesn't maintain or fund a single inch of it. But feel free to check the deed." The officer sighed and turned to Karen. "Ma'am, based on what we've seen, this doesn't appear to be a criminal case." He's within his rights to install that system. It's no more dangerous than a dog deterrent. Her eyes flared. So you're saying he can just electrocute people? No, ma'am, said the officer evenly. We're saying you shouldn't be in his pool. That one sentence was beautiful, like poetry. Karen's face turned beet red. You're all taking his side. I'm the victim here. The officer gave her a look that said, we're not doing this today. He gestured to me. We'll file a report, sir, but you're in the clear. And ma'am, I strongly advise you to stay off this property. Any further incidents will be considered trespassing. Karen didn't even respond. She just glared at me, eyes full of venom, before storming off toward her car. Her towel, still damp from the day of the incident, was crumpled on my lawn. She grabbed it like it had betrayed her, threw it into her SUV, and sped off. I thought that might be the end of it. It wasn't. The following week, I started receiving anonymous letters in my mailbox, printed from the HOA office printer, but clearly written by Karen. You are hereby notified that your property is under safety review. Failure to remove unauthorized electrical equipment will result in fines and possible suspension of community privileges. Community privileges. What was next? HOA jail. The real kicker came that Friday. I got home from the grocery store and found 3 county code inspectors walking around my backyard, clipboards in hand, snapping photos like paparazzi. Excuse me, I said, setting down my bags. Can I help you? One of them turned around. We received a complaint of unsafe electrical installations in your pool. Anonymous tip. I didn't even have to guess who filed it. I handed over my paperwork again, all the same documents I'd shown the police. The inspectors checked everything. They measured the voltage, looked at the breaker system, even tested the grounding. After 20 minutes, the lead inspector smiled. Sir, this is textbook safe. Whoever filed this complaint doesn't seem to understand electricity. I grinned. Oh, trust me, she doesn't understand much of anything. They laughed, signed off their report, and left. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, I heard Karen outside yelling at someone over the phone. Her voice carried all the way down the block. I don't care what they said. He's dangerous. He's manipulating everyone. He electrocuted me. Brenda electrocuted me. The entire neighborhood could hear her meltdown, and you could tell people were getting tired of it. The next HOA meeting was legendary. I didn't even plan to attend, but several neighbors begged me to show up, so I did, just to see the fireworks. Karen was there, of course, sitting front and center with a stack of printed complaints. She started off the meeting by demanding my immediate expulsion from the HOA. I will not live in fear of a man who weaponizes his pool, she shouted dramatically. He is a danger to the community. The board president sighed. Miss Doyle, this issue has been reviewed. The police and county inspectors have cleared Mr. Cooper of wrongdoing. But no buts. And he added, with deliberate weight, you were found to have entered private property without consent, multiple times. The room went silent. The treasurer cleared his throat. Miss Doyle, we've also reviewed your use of HOA funds for what you labeled as community recreational activities at Mr. Cooper's address. Her face turned white. Apparently, she'd been submitting reimbursement forms for pool supplies, claiming she was maintaining a community amenity. The total $3,200. There was a collective gasp. Someone in the back whispered she was swimming on the HOA's dime. The board president rubbed his temples. Effective immediately, Miss Doyle, you are suspended from the board pending investigation. Karen stood up, sputtering, waving her papers. This is harassment. You're all conspiring with him. I couldn't resist. I leaned forward just enough for my voice to carry and said, Careful, Karen. You might get another shock tonight, but this time it's reality. The room burst into laughter. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard one of the framed photos fell off the wall. That night, the entire neighborhood felt lighter. People smiled at me when I walked my dog. Someone even left a thank you card in my mailbox with a drawing of a lightning bolt and the words, for standing up to the HOA queen. But deep down, I knew it wasn't quite over. Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. As I locked my gate that evening, I saw her blinds twitching across the street, watching, plotting, and I couldn't help but grin, because little did she know her final downfall was already on its way. If you think Karen would vanish after being publicly humiliated, you don't live in suburbia. People like her don't quietly slink away, they escalate. They double down. They weaponize paperwork and petty rage and call it strategy. Within days of her suspension, Karen went nuclear. She filed a stack of formal complaints with county offices, unsafe electrical systems, harassment by surveillance equipment, public endangerment. Each one came with the same dramatic flourish she used at HOA meetings, underlined sentences, capital letters, a rigid, righteous tone that made you picture a gavel hitting nothing but air. She also emailed the local neighborhood association, the county inspectorate, and for good measure, the HOA attorney. I started getting calls from people I'd never met, neighbors, asking if I was okay, reporters asking if there was a story. She wanted headlines. She wanted the narrative flipped. What she didn't realize was how many little mistakes she'd already made, and how many of those mistakes were on camera. Remember Brenda, the friend who filmed Karen's drowning and entitlement performance? Well, apparently Brenda wasn't as loyal as Karen thought. After the initial shock and laughter, Brenda texted me a shaky message. "Mike, I have more footage. She does pool parties there. She even logs expenses. I'm scared, but you should see this." I asked her to send everything, and told her she could remain anonymous if she preferred. What she sent changed everything. There were videos of Karen organizing informal HOA gatherings at my pool, passing around receipts for community supplies, screenshots of emails where she requested reimbursement for pool chemicals and float maintenance, and even a voicemail where she casually bragged about getting the board to sign off on small reimbursements because nobody checks the totals. In her own voice, she said, "I just submitted as community expense. What are they going to do? Audit me?" That last line was the kind of admission that ages like milk, sour, and useful. I forwarded the files to the HOA president under a subject line that was both simple and devastating evidence. I didn't need to say anything else. The board convened an emergency session that night. The next morning, the president called me and asked if I'd be willing to let a professional redact personal data and publish a summary to the neighborhood transparency, he called it. I agreed. But even more potent than receipts and admissions was raw human behavior, and Karen kept giving me material. She launched a smear campaign online, posting dramatic screenshots from the county complaint portal and embellishing details. Local man traps residents in his pool electrocution scandal. She reached out to the local neighborhood page and demanded that mine be banned for promoting violence. The page moderators who'd already seen the footage weren't having it. They posted a calm, factual description of the incident, linked to HOA minutes confirming the county's findings, and urged neighbors not to spread unverified claims. As her online fury grew, so did the backlash. Neighbors began posting their own experiences: lawn invasion, rumor-mongering, uncomfortable inspections. Her pattern of petty harassment came into focus like a grid on a map. People don't like being monitored by someone who treats bylaws like a weapon, and suddenly, Karen looked less like a public servant and more like a con artist with a clipboard. The HOA didn't stop at suspension. They opened a formal audit into her expense claims. The treasurer, who had the demeanor of someone who'd eaten spreadsheets for breakfast, called me 3 days later and read off a list of irregularities longer than a CVS receipt. Not only had she submitted reimbursements for items used at my pool, she'd also been approving petty reimbursements for community refreshments she apparently provided to herself during her unauthorized swims. There were copies of canceled checks, vendor emails, and even reimbursement forms signed by Karen that bore the same handwriting. But the real dagger came in a most suburban fashion: a leaked email thread. Someone in the HOA, a cautious, law-abiding neighbor who'd been on the receiving end of Karen's gossip, forwarded an internal email. The thread revealed that Karen had been telling the board privately that she considered my backyard a de facto community facility because it served the social functions of a few board members. In her words, typed and curt, "We all enjoy the amenities. It's easier to treat it as communal. The little reimbursements cover it." A board member replied with a single sentence, "That's not how deeded private property works." Ouch. Faced with that evidence, the board escalated the matter beyond a simple suspension. They referred the case to the county for possible fraud investigation and filed a civil claim to recover the misused funds. A lawyer representing the HOA drafted a crisp, devastating letter to Karen: repay the reimbursements or face legal consequences. The tone left no room for her theatrical gasps. If you wanted drama, the funniest part arrived when Karen decided to fight fire with fire. She hired an attorney and threatened to countersue for emotional distress. I expected angry letters and maybe a wasted afternoon in mediation, but instead she misfired spectacularly. During a recorded phone call her lawyer made to the HOA's counsel, she insisted on being present. Karen, unable to keep herself from speaking, bragged about managing the books and commented that if someone wanted to challenge her, they'd have to bring receipts. That call was recorded, transcribed, and sent to the board as part of a discovery packet. Nothing like your own voice making the case that you falsified expenses to finish you off. The community reaction was almost comical in its finality. At the next board meeting, evidence was presented in a level-headed, legally appropriate way. The room sat in silence as the treasurer outlined the financial trail receipts, matched claims, traced reimbursements coded under community events, all converging at Karen's door. The board voted unanimously to expel her from the HOA and seek restitution. The county prosecutor's office, after a preliminary review, indicated they'd open an inquiry into potential fraud and false reporting. Word traveled fast. The neighborhood Facebook group, the same one where her dramatic posts used to dominate, became an archive of her undoing receipts. Screen grabs the voicemail where she confided that nobody audits her. One particularly merciless neighbor compiled a short montage of Karen's own words and behavior and posted it with the caption, "When entitlement becomes a business plan." It got thousands of views. Faced with looming legal bills, public humiliation, and a board that wouldn't budge, Karen did something I didn't expect. She packed up. Not with dignity, of course, but in a fit of rage that involved slamming cabinets, throwing away framed photos, and a tearful but not remorseful final rant to anyone who'd listen about a witch hunt. Her car left the driveway, one rainy afternoon headlights cutting through mist, and in an oddly cinematic moment, the flamingo float was found deflated and abandoned in the neighbor's garbage bin, like the last prop of a canceled production. Before she left, though, there was one last twist. In an act of petty vindictiveness, she sent a final mass email to the HOA list accusing me of orchestrating public shaming. That email backfired spectacularly. It contained a forwarded attachment of her own bank transactions, intended to intimidate board members, but instead provided one more paper trail proving the reimbursements. It was the anticlimax that sealed the deal. A week later, I uploaded a carefully redacted clip of the incident faces blurred, where necessary timestamps preserved Brenda's footage, included with her permission, and titled it candidly, entitled "Neighbor Uses My Pool Gets Electrifying. Karma." I made sure the post focused on trespassing and the abuse of HOA funds, not humiliation. It went viral by neighborhood standards, shared across city pages, commented on by people who had nothing to do with our street. Calls came from local bloggers asking for an interview. A regional station requested permission to use the footage for a human interest piece. I declined most requests. I wasn't looking to be famous just to close the chapter. In the weeks that followed, things quieted. The HOA recovered a portion of the misused funds. The county's inquiry resulted in a settlement Karen agreed to repay, to refrain from HOA participation, and to remove herself from any volunteer roles. She never admitted wrongdoing publicly, that's the thing about pride. But the last I heard, she moved to a town 3 counties over where I'm sure she's already found a new hobby, telling people the story of how the HOA unfairly treated to her. Neighbors waved when they saw me now. The small children who used to hide from her clipboard waved back without fear. I walked my yard with a little more ease, my gate locked, and my camera unashamedly recording the quiet joy of reclaimed privacy. And as I sat one evening watching the pool shimmer under the sunset, I thought about how messy justice can be, how small, steady actions and a collection of receipts can topple a tyrant more surely than any dramatic confrontation. Sometimes the truth doesn't need fireworks. It needs a camera, a little patience, and people willing to speak up. For the first time in months, my neighborhood felt like the calm suburb it was supposed to be. No more clipboard inspections, no angry emails about mailbox paint, no mysterious HOA fines tucked under doormats. Just quiet evenings, trimmed lawns, and the gentle hum of sprinklers at sunset. It was strange how peaceful silence could feel once the chaos moved out. After Karen left, the street seemed lighter, not just metaphorically but literally. Her house, once the epicenter of HOA patrol activity, stayed dark at night. The once perfectly trimmed bushes began to grow wild, reclaiming the sterile uniformity she had enforced for years. Sometimes I'd pass by during my evening walks and see a single porch light flickering behind dusty blinds. It was oddly poetic. Her obsession with control had finally turned into isolation. A week after her departure, the HOA held a special meeting to address recent events and restore community trust. For the first time, the agenda didn't include threats, fines, or accusations. People showed up with snacks, not evidence folders. The new board president, a kind woman named Gloria, opened the meeting with a statement that felt refreshing in its simplicity. "Let's stop policing each other and start being neighbors again," she said. The room applauded. Then, to my surprise, she thanked me publicly for standing up against misconduct and handling it with professionalism and restraint. I laughed quietly to myself at that part. If only she knew how close I'd come to losing my temper countless times. But it wasn't about revenge anymore. Somewhere along the line, this stopped being a story about one entitled neighbor and became something bigger, about drawing a line between accountability and tyranny, about protecting your peace when others try to invade it. After the meeting, a few neighbors came up to me with kind words. "Mike, you did the right thing. Man, you handled that better than I ever could have. My husband still watches that pool clip when he needs a laugh. It felt strange to be a local legend for something so absurd, but I'll admit it was nice knowing people understood what I'd gone through. I wasn't the cranky old guy yelling at clouds anymore. I was the man who outsmarted the HOA's queen. Later that evening, I went home, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and sat by my pool, the same pool that had caused months of chaos. The water was calm, reflecting the orange sky and the first flickers of the garden lights. For a moment, I thought about draining it entirely, wiping away all traces of the madness. But then I laughed. No, the pool wasn't the problem. The pool had been innocent all along. It was just the stage where truth finally performed its best scene. I'd replaced the low-voltage system with a new filtration setup, no more sparks, no more surprises. But every time the pool lights flickered in the evening, I couldn't help but remember that day when Karma wore a flamingo float and designer sunglasses. As weeks turned into months, life resumed its peaceful rhythm. I started swimming again, grilling on weekends, and even inviting neighbors over for barbecues. People joked that my pool had become a symbol, the electric fountain of justice, one neighbor called it. I never corrected them. I just smiled. Then, one afternoon, while checking my mail, I noticed a small letter wedged among the flyers. No return address, just my name, written in sharp cursive. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a short note. You may think you won, but you'll never truly understand what it's like to be right and have everyone against you. You made me the villain. Enjoy your little victory, K. I stared at it for a while, half expecting it to burst into glitter or confetti out of sheer Karen-style dramatics. But it was just paper, angry, bitter, powerless paper. I folded it neatly, tossed it into the fire pit, and watched it curl into smoke. That was the last trace of her I ever saw. Ironically, her departure united the neighborhood. The HOA, once a tool for micromanagement, turned into something useful. Instead of nitpicking mailbox colors, they organized block parties, tree planting events, and charity drives. The tone shifted from compliance to community. Sometimes people need a villain to remind them what cooperation looks like. One evening, during the first post-Karen neighborhood cookout, Brenda walked over holding a tray of brownies. "You know," she said with a smirk, "if you ever want to make a sequel to that pool video, I've got editing software now." I laughed. "Let's hope there's no sequel. I'm retired from drama." She winked. "Sure. Until the next Karen moves in." I raised my glass. "Then may the current be ready." We both laughed, clinking glasses under the warm glow of the patio lights. But beneath the humor and satisfaction, something deeper stayed with me. That whole ordeal, from the trespassing to the threats to the investigations, taught me something important about boundaries. Not just the physical kind marked by fences and locks, but the personal ones that protect your peace. People like Karen don't respect silence. They mistake it for weakness. The more you ignore them, the more they push, until you make them realize silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. The pool incident wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming power, about reminding myself that respect is something you enforce, not beg for. And honestly, it reminded me that laughter can be a weapon too. Every time I think of her face that day, the shock, the shriek, the hair plastered against her forehead, I don't feel guilt. I feel relief. Because for once, karma didn't take years to show up. It arrived instantly, perfectly timed, and slightly electrified. Months later, I got a letter from the HOA attorney confirming the case closure. Karen had agreed to a quiet settlement, repaid most of the funds, and was barred from ever serving on any HOA board in the state again. The attorney ended the letter with a dry but fitting line. "Thank you for your cooperation and for demonstrating that compliance and decency can coexist even under voltage." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. That night I sat by the pool again, the same spot where it all began. The stars shimmered above the water, rippled softly, and for the first time in a long while, the world felt balanced. I raised my glass and whispered into the quiet air. To boundaries, justice, and a little shock therapy. The pool lights flickered as if in agreement. If there's one thing I've learned from this chaos, it's that peace without boundaries isn't peace at all. You can't control how entitled people act, but you can control how much power you give them. Stand firm, protect what's yours, and when you have to fight, do it with wit, not rage. Karen's story wasn't just about trespassing. It was about arrogance meeting consequence. Sometimes the universe doesn't hand out lightning bolts. Sometimes you just have to wire one yourself safely and legally, of course. To anyone watching, don't let anyone convince you that being kind means being a doormat. You can be calm, respectful, even patient, but never passive. And when karma finally knocks, make sure you've got the cameras rolling. Now tell me, have you ever dealt with a Karen or a nosy HOA neighbor like this? Drop your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life HOA drama and revenge tales. Because as you just saw, sometimes justice really does come with a spark.